They say mothers are supposed to give unconditionally. We pour our youth, our energy, and our bank accounts into our children, believing that when the time comes, the safety net we wove for them will be there to catch us. I used to believe that. For 38 years, I was a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on finding the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit. I hunted down embezzlers, exposed corporate fraud, and unraveled complex financial webs for federal courts. I was trained to spot a lie from a mile away. But the most dangerous lies aren't the ones told by criminals. They are the ones told at the dinner table. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The air in Alpharetta, Georgia, had that crisp, biting chill that signaled winter was rushing in. I was standing on the expansive imported Italian tile porch of my son's 6-bedroom estate. In my hands, I held a vintage Dutch oven containing a heritage turkey recipe that had been in our family for 3 generations. It was heavy, and my wrists ached, but I held it with the kind of foolish hope only a mother possesses. Through the massive arched windows, the house glowed with perfection. It looked like a spread out of Architectural Digest. I could see my daughter-in-law, Jessica, arranging imported pampas grass in a brushed brass vase. Jessica was 33, a lifestyle influencer with 250,000 followers who watched her curate a life of aggressive, beige-toned perfection. When the heavy oak door finally opened, it wasn't my son David who greeted me. It was Jessica. She didn't open the door fully, just enough to create a barrier. She was wearing a matching cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my first car. Her smile was practiced, flawless, and completely devoid of warmth. "Martha," she breathed, her voice dropping into that soft, patronizing register she used on her Instagram stories. "What are you doing here?" I shifted the heavy pot. "I brought the turkey prep. David said you were hosting the big dinner this year, and I know how much work it is. I thought I could get a head start." Jessica closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaling deeply as if summoning the patience to deal with a toddler. She placed a manicured hand flat against the doorframe. "Martha, I think there's been a miscommunication," she said, her tone dripping with weaponized gentleness. "We're actually pivoting this Thanksgiving. We are doing a highly curated, intimate gathering. Just our chosen family. A couple of brand partners and David's investors." I stood there, the cold seeping through my wool coat. "Chosen family? Jessica, I am his mother. I'm Riley's grandmother." Jessica let out a soft, rehearsed sigh. "I know, Martha, and we honor your role in our past. But right now, David and I are really focusing on protecting our peace. We're in a season of setting firm boundaries to heal our generational trauma. Your energy, it's just very traditional. It doesn't align with the mindful, elevated space we are trying to manifest for the holidays. It's toxic for our current growth phase. Protecting our peace. Setting boundaries. Generational trauma." She wielded therapy speak like a scalpel, slicing away my family ties under the guise of mental health. I looked past her shoulder. In the grand foyer, leaning against the custom wainscoting, was my son, David, a 35-year-old tech executive whose first startup I had quietly funded. He was staring at his phone, deliberately avoiding my gaze. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak up. "I see," I whispered. My voice didn't shake. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. "I'm so glad you have the emotional maturity to understand," Jessica smiled, a chilling curve of her lips. "You should take this time to focus on your own self-care, Martha. Have a mindful holiday." The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy metallic thud. I didn't cry on the drive back to my quiet, modest home. I didn't shatter the vintage Dutch oven against their brick driveway. I simply drove. When I got home, I opened my iPad. I didn't want to look, but a morbid curiosity guided my finger to Instagram. There it was, Jessica's latest reel. It was a high-definition montage of her new $50,000 kitchen remodel, marble countertops, custom copper fixtures, and a brand-new $120,000 Range Rover parked in the background. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance. So blessed that my husband and I built this life from the ground up through pure hustle and healthy boundaries. I stared at the screen. Built from the ground up. David made a good salary, yes, but I knew the tech market had been brutal this year. I knew his bonuses had been slashed. I knew because just 3 months ago, he had sat at my worn kitchen table, rubbing his temples, complaining about inflation and the cost of keeping up appearances for Jessica's brand. But I pushed the thought away. I told myself it wasn't my business anymore. If they wanted to live in a house of cards, let them. I was financially secure. My late husband and I had lived below our means. My house was paid off. My beloved little cabin on Lake Lanier, our sanctuary, was paid off. I had my pension, my investments, and a pristine credit score of 820 E20. I was safe, or so I thought. The illusion shattered 3 days later. It started as something agonizingly mundane. I was standing at the counter of my local pharmacy picking up a refill of my blood pressure medication. The total was $52. I handed the clerk my premium travel rewards card, the one I paid off in full every single month. The clerk swiped it. The machine beeped. A sharp, angry red light flashed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes," the young man said, looking uncomfortable. "It says declined." I frowned, adjusting my glasses. "That's impossible. It's a premium card. Run it again, please. The chip must be dirty." He wiped it on his shirt and inserted it again. The same angry beep. Still declined. The prompt says, "Account frozen. Credit limit exceeded." A flush of heat crept up my neck. The woman in line behind me shifted impatiently, sighing loud enough for me to hear. Credit limit exceeded? The limit on that card was $30,000. I hadn't used it for anything more than groceries and gas in weeks. "Let me use another," I said, my voice tight. I pulled out my backup debit card. It went through, but my hands were suddenly trembling. The drive home felt like a blur. A strange, metallic taste pooled in my mouth. The taste of adrenaline. The instinct I had buried since my retirement began to claw its way back to the surface. The forensic accountant was waking up. I didn't even take off my coat when I walked through my front door. I went straight to my home office. I booted up my secure desktop, a heavily encrypted machine I used for my personal finances. I logged into my bank portal. My checking account was fine. My savings account was untouched. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It must be a bank error, I thought. A glitch in the system. But years of investigating white-collar crime had taught me one ironclad rule. Never trust the surface. Always pull the master ledger. I opened a new tab and logged into the Federal Credit Reporting Bureau. I requested my Tri-Merge Credit Report, the comprehensive document that shows every financial heartbeat tied to my Social Security number. The screen loaded. The number flashed in bold black ink. Credit score, 510. My stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. 510. That wasn't a glitch. That was a financial massacre. My eyes darted down the page, scanning the trade lines. Delinquent payments. Maxed out utilization. But then, I saw it. The anomaly. The glaring, impossible data point that made the room spin. Under the Real Estate Mortgages section, there was a new entry, dated 6 months ago. Lender. Apex Financial Holdings. Status, active. 30 days past due. Original balance, $200,000. Collateral, the Lake Lanier cabin. I stopped breathing. The cabin. The rustic little house by the water that my husband and I had bought 20 years ago. The one we had meticulously paid off. The one that was solely in my name. Someone had taken out a $200,000 second mortgage on my property. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the credit bureau and logged directly into the county clerk's public records database. I typed in my parcel number. I needed to see the recorded deed of trust. I needed to see the signature. The PDF loaded. I scrolled past the legal jargon, past the loan terms, straight to the final page. There it was. My name, Martha E. Hayes. But it wasn't my handwriting. It was an electronic signature, executed via a secure online portal. Authorized by an IP address I didn't recognize. Authorized by an email address I had never created. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the house suddenly deafening. Someone hadn't just stolen my credit card. Someone had stolen my identity, leveraged my most prized asset, and cashed out $200,000 in my name. And they were letting it default. I looked up at the framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of David and Jessica at their wedding, smiling brightly, looking like royalty, manifesting abundance, built from the ground up. The cold realization washed over me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a faceless hacker in a foreign country. Hackers steal cash and disappear. They don't take out mortgages on specific debt-free family cabins. Only someone who knew my portfolio intimately would know that cabin was a gold mine of untapped equity. Only someone who had access to my old tax returns could bypass the security questions. Only family. Jessica had told me to live less comfortably. She had told me to protect my peace. I reached for my phone, but I didn't dial the police. Not yet. If I called the police now, it would be a messy domestic dispute. Jessica would spin it. She would cry. She would gaslight. She would claim I was confused and forgetful. No, if you want to trap a parasite, you don't burn down the house. You methodically cut off its air supply. I closed the county clerk tab and opened a blank Excel spreadsheet. I cracked my knuckles, feeling the familiar icy calm settle over my nerves. They thought they were dealing with an outdated, toxic old woman. They forgot they were dealing with an auditor. The audit had officially begun. Here is part 2 of the script. I have deeply expanded on Martha's forensic accounting process, turning what could be a boring financial review into a tense, high-stakes psychological investigation. The emotional contrast between her cold spreadsheet and Jessica's fake internet life is highlighted to build maximum frustration and anticipation for the audience. When a house is on fire, human instinct tells you to scream, to panic, to run out into the street and beg for help. But when you are a forensic accountant, you are trained to do the exact opposite. You don't scream. You close the doors. You seal the windows. You measure the heat of the flames. You find the accelerant. And you map exactly how the arsonist struck the match. It was 3 a.m. The rest of Atlanta was asleep, wrapped in the quiet comfort of the approaching Thanksgiving holiday. I sat at my desk, a mug of black coffee gone ice cold beside my mousepad. I had not moved for 6 hours. I opened a new, password-protected Excel workbook. I named it simply, The Ledger. Step 1 of any fraud investigation is securing the perimeter. Before I could find out where the money went, I had to stop the bleeding. I picked up the phone and dialed the 24-hour fraud hotline for my primary bank. I bypassed the automated system and got a late-shift representative on the line. I didn't sound like a confused elderly woman. I used my federal clearance tone. I froze every account. The checking, the savings, the primary credit cards. I placed hard locks on my Social Security number across all 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I revoked every authorized user. No money would move in or out of my name without a verbal confirmation and a dual-factor biometric authentication that only I possessed. The perimeter was secure. Now it was time to hunt. I started with the most glaring wound, the $200,000 second mortgage on the Lake Lanier cabin. How did they bypass the bank's security protocols? You can't just take out a mortgage on a property you don't own by filling out an online form. Lenders require notarized signatures, proof of identity, and legal authority. I logged into the county clerk's portal again and downloaded the full 45-page deed of trust. I zoomed in on page 12. There it was, a legally binding addendum. It was a durable power of attorney, POA, granting full financial control over my estate. I stared at the date on the POA, October 14th, 2 years ago. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes, letting the memory materialize. 2 years ago in October, I had a mild scare with my heart, an arrhythmia that required a minor outpatient procedure. I was heavily medicated, groggy, and frightened. David and Jessica had been there. Jessica had brought a stack of hospital admission forms on a clipboard, cooing softly, stroking my hair, telling me I just needed to sign here, here, and here so they could handle the billing while I recovered. I had signed my own financial death warrant in a hospital bed, guided by the manicured hand of my daughter-in-law. The betrayal hit me not like a wave, but like a physical blow to the ribs. It wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was premeditated. They had kept that power of attorney in their back pocket for 2 years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, waiting until they needed a massive injection of cash to keep their luxury lifestyle afloat. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until I saw sparks. It would have been so easy to pick up the phone right then, to call David, to scream into the receiver, to ask him how he could let his wife do this to the woman who gave him life, to ask him if the imported Italian tiles in his foyer were worth his mother's sanctuary. But anger is a luxury an auditor cannot afford. Anger makes you sloppy. I needed data. I took a sip of the cold coffee and returned to the screen. Step 2. Follow the money. A $200,000 loan doesn't just sit in the ether. It gets wired. I pulled the settlement statement from the loan documents. At the bottom, in tiny print, was a routing number and an account number where the loan proceeds were dispersed. It wasn't a joint account with David and Jessica. It wasn't David's business account. It was an account held at a boutique commercial bank in Delaware. I opened a tab for the Georgia Secretary of State's corporate registry. When you want to hide money, you don't put it in your personal checking. You build a ghost. You build a shell company. I cross-referenced the Delaware routing information with domestic LLC registrations. A name popped up on the screen. Entity name: Hayes Consulting and Media Group, LLC. Formation date: November 1st, just 3 weeks after they secured my power of attorney. Registered agent: Jessica Hayes. Once I found the shell company, the rest of the puzzle began to snap together with horrifying clarity. The second mortgage wasn't the only thing they had stolen. It was just the biggest. Now that I knew what to look for, I went back through 3 years of my own bank statements. As an older woman living alone, I had put most of my bills on autopay. Property taxes, utilities, insurance. I didn't check them line by line anymore because I thought my life was simple. I was wrong. I began highlighting anomalies. Small at first. A $400 recurring monthly charge labeled HCMG Retainer. HCMG, Hayes Consulting and Media Group. For 3 years, Jessica had been quietly siphoning $400 a month out of my checking account, masking it as a generic subscription or retainer fee. Then came the credit cards, the ones I rarely used, the ones with the massive limits I kept open just in case of an emergency. Using the power of attorney, Jessica had added herself as an authorized user, suppressed the paper statements, and rerouted the digital alerts to a burner email address. I started pulling the transaction histories of those hidden cards. It was a digital diary of their vanity. December 12th, $8,500 at a luxury furniture importer in Atlanta. February 3rd, $14,000 for a private villa rental in Tulum, Mexico. June 18th, $4,200 at a high-end cosmetic dermatology clinic in Beverly Hills. The ledger grew, line by line, row by row. 142 unauthorized transactions. The grand total of stolen funds, including the mortgage, sat at the bottom of the spreadsheet in bold red text. $314,850. $314,000. My retirement. The money my husband had worked 60-hour weeks at the firm to save. The safety net that was supposed to pay for my end-of-life care so I wouldn't be a burden to my son. And what had it bought? It bought a facade. I picked up my iPad again. I placed it next to the computer monitor. I opened Jessica's Instagram page and began correlating the dates. I needed to see exactly how my stolen future was being packaged and sold to the world. I matched the $14,000 Tulum charge on my spreadsheet to a video posted in February. The video showed Jessica in a designer swimsuit, sipping a green juice on a private balcony overlooking the ocean. The caption read, "Manifesting this reality didn't happen overnight. David and I made huge sacrifices to build our wealth. Never let anyone tell you that you can't have it all. Hashtag boss babe. Hashtag self-made. Hashtag couple goals. I scrolled down. I matched the $8,500 furniture charge to a photo of her living room. Investing in pieces that bring peace to our sanctuary. Remember, your environment reflects your inner worth. My inner worth. A dark, bitter laugh escaped my throat. It sounded like breaking glass in the quiet room. She was preaching financial independence to millions of young women, playing the role of the enlightened, self-made guru, all while acting as a parasite securely attached to an old woman's veins. And David, my David, he knew. He had to know. You don't live in a multi-million-dollar lifestyle on a struggling mid-level tech salary without asking where the extra $300,000 came from. He knew, and he looked the other way. He let his wife strip mine his mother's future so he wouldn't have to admit he was failing. He chose the comfort of her lies over my survival. Dawn was breaking over Atlanta. The first pale light of morning crept through my office blinds, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I printed the ledger, all 20 pages of it. The printer hummed and spit out the warm sheets of paper, each one a nail in the coffin of their perfect life. I stacked the papers neatly. I aligned the edges. I placed them inside a thick manila folder, right next to the fraudulent power of attorney and the Delaware LLC registration. Jessica had told me my traditional energy was toxic for their growth phase. She told me to go home and practice self-care. I looked at the thick manila folder resting on my desk. "You're right, Jessica," I whispered to the empty room. "It's time for some self-care." I wasn't going to call the police. The police would arrest her, sure. But the court system is slow. Warrants take time. Lawyers plea down. If I simply handed this over to a detective, Jessica would play the victim. She would go on Instagram, cry on camera, claim a misunderstanding, claim I gave her the money and got confused. Her followers would rally. She would start a GoFundMe. She would survive. No, a simple arrest wasn't enough. I didn't just want my money back. I wanted to dismantle the very thing she valued above all else. I wanted to destroy her audience. I wanted the facade to crumble while the whole world was watching. And to do that, I needed to set a trap. I needed to give her enough rope to hang herself publicly. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and uncapped my fountain pen. I began drafting a document. A very specific, highly legal document disguised as a favor. They thought I was a naive, disposable old woman. They had entirely forgotten that before I was a grandmother, I was the woman who put a corrupt state senator behind bars using nothing but a calculator and a tax return. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp thing. Let the Thanksgiving games begin. Here is part 4 of the script. In this section, the emotional stakes reach their peak. We transition from the public humiliation of the daughter-in-law to the deeply personal, devastating betrayal of the son. Furthermore, the introduction of the conservatorship guardianship plotline elevates the danger, turning this from a simple financial dispute into a terrifying battle for Martha's basic human rights. When a massive fraud is exposed, the perpetrators usually follow a predictable 3-step psychological pattern. First comes the shock, then comes the deflection, and finally, when cornered, the desperate clawing attempt to survive. I knew Jessica would fight back. A narcissist stripped of her audience is like a cornered animal. But I wasn't thinking about Jessica the morning after the launch party. I was thinking about my son. At 6:30 a.m., the heavy, frantic pounding started at my front door. I set my teacup down. I walked to the foyer, my slippers silent against the hardwood. I didn't check the peephole. I already knew who it was. I unbolted the door. David stood on the porch, drenched in the freezing autumn rain. He was still wearing the custom Armani suit from the night before, but it was ruined. His tie was gone, his collar was unbuttoned, and his eyes were bloodshot. The polished tech executive was gone. In his place was a terrified, hollow-looking boy. "Mom!" he choked out, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, reaching out as if to hug me. I took one deliberate step back. The boundary line was drawn, invisible but absolute. His arms fell to his sides. "Mom, please, You have to stop this. The police seized Jessica's phone. The bank froze my corporate accounts. My credit cards are declining. I had to beg an Uber driver to bring me here because I couldn't even pay for gas. It's all gone. I looked at him. The son I had carried. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had quietly paid by working double shifts during tax season. The money is gone, David, I corrected him softly, and it wasn't yours to begin with. I didn't know, he cried, running a trembling hand through his wet hair. Tears mingled with the raindrops on his face. Mom, you have to believe me. Jessica handles all the finances. She told me she was doing brand deals. She told me the shell company was for her sponsorships. She manipulated me just like she manipulated you. She ruined us. If you don't call the detective and drop the charges, I'm going to lose my job. I'll go to jail for something my wife did. It was a beautiful performance. The trembling lip, the desperate eyes. If I had been an ordinary mother, my heart would have broken. I would have rushed to protect him. I would have believed that my sweet boy was just an innocent victim of a wicked woman. But I am not an ordinary mother. I am an auditor, and the data never cries. Come with me, David, I said. Turning my back on him, I walked into my home office. He followed, leaving wet footprints on my rug. I sat down at my desk and woke up the monitors. You didn't know, I repeated, my voice dropping its maternal warmth, becoming the flat, clinical tone of an interrogator. I clicked open the master ledger. I swear, Mom, she forged the signatures. She set up the Delaware LLC. She did, I agreed. Jessica filed the LLC paperwork. Jessica executed the power of attorney. But let's look at the metadata, David. I pulled up a secondary document highlighting a column of IP addresses and digital timestamps. When the $200,000 second mortgage was authorized on my lake cabin, the bank sent a dual-factor authentication text message, I explained, pointing to the screen. Do you know whose phone number received that 6-digit code? David stopped breathing. It wasn't Jessica's, I said, looking up at him. It was yours. Your cell phone pinged the bank's server at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the IP address that officially logged into my portal to confirm the loan, it traced back to the secure Wi-Fi network at your tech firm's headquarters. Jessica couldn't have authorized that loan, David. She was at a Pilates retreat in Sedona that week. I checked her Instagram. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the rain lashing against the window. You didn't just look the other way, I whispered, the crushing weight of the betrayal finally making my voice shake. You held the door open while she robbed me. You used my cabin to pay off your luxury cars. You used my retirement to fund your country club memberships. You sold my future to buy your wife's affection. David stared at the screen. The trembling, crying boy vanished. The mask slipped completely, revealing the terrible, entitled truth beneath. His posture straightened, his jaw locked. When he spoke, his voice was cold, devoid of any remorse. You have a paid-off house, Mom, he sneered, the resentment bubbling to the surface. You have a pension. You sit in this house alone, hoarding wealth you don't even use. Do you have any idea how hard it is out there? I am a vice president. I have to maintain an image. Jessica has to maintain an image. We needed capital to build our brand, and you were sitting on dead equity. My stomach turned. Dead equity. That's what your father's life insurance policy was to you? It's what it is, he shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. It's economics. You're old. You don't need a 6-figure safety net to knit sweaters and drink tea. We are your family. You were supposed to help us, but instead you trapped us with that confession of judgment. You destroyed my wife on live television. I simply handed you the bill for the life you chose to live, I replied, standing up. Now get out of my house. He glared at me, his eyes dark and unrecognizable. You think you've won because you froze some bank accounts. You have no idea what Jessica is capable of. You just declared war on the wrong person. He turned and walked out. The front door slammed, rattling the picture frames in the hallway. David's threat wasn't an empty one. When you trap a narcissist, Their first instinct is not to apologize. It is to destroy your credibility. If Jessica was going to escape a felony fraud conviction and invalidate the confession of judgment she had signed, she needed a legal loophole. She needed to prove that the confession was coerced. She needed to prove that I was incompetent. 3 days later, a process server knocked on my door and handed me a manila envelope. I opened it at my kitchen table. My eyes scanned the bold, capitalized letters at the top of the legal filing. Emergency petition for conservatorship and guardianship. Petitioner, Jessica Hayes. Proposed ward, Martha E. Hayes. The air left my lungs. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocating, the walls closing in. Conservatorship. It is the most terrifying legal weapon in the American judicial system. It is designed to protect the vulnerable, but in the wrong hands, it is a tool of absolute legal erasure. If a judge granted this petition, I would cease to exist as a free adult. I would lose the right to manage my money, hire a lawyer, choose my doctors, or even vote. Jessica would become my legal guardian. She would have the power to drop the criminal charges against herself, liquidate my assets, and lock me in a nursing facility. My hands began to tremble as I read through the sworn affidavits attached to the petition. It was a master class in character assassination, dressed up in weaponized therapy speak. Martha Hayes has exhibited severe paranoia, paranoid delusions, and extreme financial erraticism, Jessica's sworn statement read. Following the tragic death of her husband, she suffered a documented mental breakdown. Recently, she has begun hallucinating that her family is stealing from her, resulting in erratic, aggressive actions, including locking her own son out of her accounts and filing false police reports. For her own safety, she requires immediate, full-time supervision. I flipped the page. There was a letter attached. A medical evaluation signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne, a private concierge psychiatrist in Atlanta known for treating wealthy clients. The letter stated that based on behavioral accounts from the family and my medical history, specifically the mild nervous exhaustion I suffered 15 years ago when my husband passed, I was showing definitive signs of early-onset dementia and acute paranoia. They hadn't just forged my financial documents. They had bought a doctor. They were going to use my grief against me. A hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, an ex parte emergency hearing meant to blindside me before I could mount a proper defense. I sat at my table, the terrifying reality washing over me. All my spreadsheets, all my IP logs, all my forensic accounting, none of it would matter if a judge looked at me and saw a crazy, confused old woman. If Jessica convinced the court I was losing my mind, my evidence would be dismissed as the frantic scribblings of a paranoid dementia patient. They were going to take my mind. They were going to take my freedom. I looked at the clock. It was Friday evening. I had exactly 60 hours to save my own life. I needed a lawyer, yes, but more than that, I needed a witness. I needed someone inside their perfectly curated toxic house. Someone who knew the truth. Someone Jessica couldn't manipulate or buy off. My phone buzzed on the counter. An incoming text message. I picked it up. It was from an unsaved number, but I recognized the tone immediately. Grandma, it's Riley. Mom and Dad are fighting. Mom is burning documents in the fireplace. I took pictures of what she left on her desk. Are you okay? I'm scared. My 16-year-old granddaughter, the quiet, observant girl who had always sat in the corner during family dinners, watching her parents' fake lives with silent disdain. I stared at the screen. The fear inside me dissolved, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. Jessica thought she could play dirty. She thought she could erase me. I typed my reply. I'm okay, sweetie. Don't let them see you. Save the pictures to a cloud drive. And Riley? Pack a bag. The audit was over. It was time to go to war. Here is the final installment. Part 5. This section delivers the ultimate courtroom climax, focusing on sharp legal maneuvering, the heartbreaking but powerful testimony of the granddaughter, and the brutal final twist where Jessica's true nature destroys her own marriage. It concludes with a satisfying, reflective resolution. Fulton County Probate Court does not smell like justice. It smells like floor wax, stale coffee, and desperation. It is a place where families go to legally tear each other apart over the remnants of a life. It was 9 a.m. on Monday. I sat at the respondent's table, wearing a tailored navy blue suit I hadn't worn since my retirement dinner. Beside me sat Arthur Vance, an estate litigator I had known for 20 years. He was a shark in a cheap tie, and he knew my mind was as sharp as the crease in his trousers. Across the aisle sat David and Jessica. Jessica had dressed for the part. The designer trench coat and diamond rings were gone. Instead, she wore a soft pastel cardigan, her hair pulled into a loose, exhausted-looking bun. She held a crumpled tissue, dabbing her dry eyes. She was playing the role of the heartbroken, exhausted caregiver forced to make a tragic decision for her mother-in-law's own good. David sat rigidly next to her, staring blankly at the mahogany table, refusing to look in my direction. Judge Eleanor Vance, no relation to my lawyer, but a woman known for her no-nonsense intolerance for courtroom theatrics, adjusted her reading glasses and looked down from the bench. We are here today for an emergency ex parte petition regarding the conservatorship of Martha E. Hayes, Judge Vance began, her voice cutting through the heavy air. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed. Jessica's lawyer, a slick, high-priced attorney in a custom suit, stood up. He painted a masterful, tragic picture. He spoke of my late husband. He spoke of my history of nervous exhaustion. He waved the letter from Dr. Eris Thorne, the concierge psychiatrist, treating it like gospel. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes is suffering from acute paranoid delusions, likely brought on by early-stage dementia, the lawyer said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. She has hallucinated that her son and daughter-in-law are stealing from her. In her confusion, she maliciously locked them out of accounts holding funds she previously gifted them. More alarmingly, she filed a false confession of judgment and weaponized the police to raid a private business event. We are asking the court to grant temporary emergency guardianship to her son and daughter-in-law to prevent further self-sabotage and secure her medical care. Jessica let out a perfectly timed, muffled sob. David patted her shoulder stiffly. Judge Vance looked at the medical evaluation, then turned her piercing gaze to my table. Mr. Vance, does your client understand the severity of these allegations? Arthur stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. She does, Your Honor. In fact, Mrs. Hayes would like to address the court directly. The judge raised an eyebrow. Usually, lawyers keep their clients silent in competency hearings. Very well, Mrs. Hayes, but keep it strictly to the facts. I stood up. I didn't lean on the table. I didn't shake. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, the petitioners claim I am suffering from paranoid delusions, I began, my voice clear, projecting to the back of the courtroom. Delusion implies a break from reality. I am a retired forensic accountant. For 38 years, my reality has been data, and data does not hallucinate. I picked up the thick, heavy binder from my table and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. In tab 1, you will find the IP logs from the bank, proving that the $200,000 second mortgage on my property was not a confused gift, but a wire fraud authorized from my son's corporate office while I was at home, I stated. In tab 2, you will see the incorporation documents for a Delaware shell company named Hayes Consulting, registered by Jessica Hayes, into which 131 unauthorized transfers were made from my accounts. In tab 3, you will find my credit card statements, highlighting over $80,000 in luxury purchases shipped directly to their Alpharetta address. Jessica's lawyer jumped up. Objection! Your Honor, the respondent is exhibiting the exact paranoid fixation we outlined in our petition. She is obsessing over normal family financial support and twisting it into a conspiracy. Overruled, Judge Vance snapped, flipping through my binder. Her eyes were widening slightly as she read the meticulous spreadsheets. She looked down at Jessica's lawyer. Counsel, this is a highly detailed forensic audit. It does not read like the work of a dementia patient. Your Honor, the lawyer stammered, pointing to the medical letter. We have a sworn evaluation from a licensed psychiatrist. A psychiatrist who has never met me, I interrupted smoothly. If you look at tab 4, Your Honor, You will see a subpoenaed email from Jessica Hayes to Dr. Eris Thorne, dated 3 days ago. It details a $10,000 consultation fee paid to him the same day he wrote that letter. He diagnosed me based entirely on an email from my daughter-in-law. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom. Jessica's tissue slipped from her hand. David finally looked up, his face ashen. However, Judge Vance said slowly, tapping her pen, Mrs. Hayes, while this financial data is compelling, family disputes over money can be complex. They claim you gave them verbal permission for these transactions and only revoked it recently out of spite. They claim the confession of judgment was signed under duress. Without a witness to the contrary, this is a battle of narratives. I turned around. Standing at the back of the courtroom, wearing a simple denim jacket and carrying a worn backpack, was my 16-year-old granddaughter, Riley. I have a witness, Your Honor, I said softly. Jessica gasped loudly. No, she's a minor. You can't drag her into this, Martha. You're sick. Jessica stood up, dropping the Gentle Caregiver Act entirely. Her voice was shrill, desperate. Your Honor, don't let her do this to my daughter. Sit down, Mrs. Hayes, the judge commanded. She looked at the teenager. Young lady, what is your name? Riley walked down the center aisle. She didn't look at her parents. She walked straight to the witness stand and took the oath. Her hands were shaking, but her chin was held high. My name is Riley Hayes, she said into the microphone. Riley, Arthur Vance approached the stand gently. Can you tell the court what happened at your house last Friday night, after the police raided your mother's event? Riley swallowed hard. She pulled her phone from her pocket. My parents were screaming at each other. Dad was drinking. Mom was pulling files out of her home office and throwing them into the living room fireplace. I hid on the stairs. I recorded them. Jessica leaped up from her chair. Riley, stop it right now. Bailiff, if she speaks again, remove her from my courtroom, Judge Vance ordered, her voice like cracked ice. She looked at Riley. Play the recording, Riley. Riley tapped her screen. The audio was slightly muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. Jessica's voice, frantic. Burn the ledger, David! If they find the Delaware tax returns, we're going to federal prison. We used her social security number. David's voice slurred and panicked. You told me it was foolproof. You told me she wouldn't notice. Now she's got a confession of judgment on us. Jessica's voice, cold and vicious. I'm handling it. Eris is writing the psychiatric hold letter tonight. We file for emergency conservatorship on Monday. We tell the judge she's insane, we invalidate the confession, and we lock her in a memory care facility before the DA can subpoena the bank. Hand me the lighter. Judge Vance didn't say a word for a long time. She took off her glasses, folded them slowly, and placed them on the bench. When she spoke, the fury in her voice was a palpable, living thing. In my 20 years on the bench, I have presided over bitter divorces, corporate theft, and contested estates, Judge Vance said, staring directly into Jessica's soul. But the malicious, calculated cruelty required to attempt to strip a perfectly sane woman of her civil rights, her freedom, and her dignity simply to cover up your own felony theft is entirely repulsive. The judge picked up her gavel. The emergency petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. The confession of judgment is fully reinstated and enforceable immediately. Furthermore, I am impounding this recording and all exhibits presented by the respondent. I am formally referring this case and the actions of Dr. Eris Thorne to the Fulton County District Attorney and the FBI for immediate criminal investigation into wire fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The trap had not just closed, it had locked. The bailiff moved to escort us out. But before we could leave the tables, the final, most predictable phase of the fraudster's psychology occurred. When the ship goes down, the rats eat each other. Jessica stood up. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Riley. She looked at the expensive lawyer standing next to her. I want a deal, Jessica said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. David lifted his head, blinking in confusion. Jess? What are you doing? Jessica slipped the massive diamond ring off her left hand and placed it flat on the mahogany table. She looked down at her husband like he was a stranger, like he was a bad investment she was finally liquidating. "I am a mother. I was coerced," Jessica stated to her lawyer, loud enough for the detective standing by the door to hear. "David controlled the finances. He forced me to sign those Delaware documents. He threatened to take my daughter if I didn't comply. I will testify against him for full immunity." "Jessica!" David screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed through the courtroom. He reached for her, but she stepped back, her face a mask of pure, self-preserving ice. She turned on her heel and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her husband drowning in the wreckage she had engineered. I watched David break. The illusion of his perfect life, his perfect wife, his perfect wealth, all of it shattered into a million jagged pieces on the courtroom floor. He was crying, sobbing into his hands, waiting for the officers to approach him. A part of me, the mother part, ached. It is a terrible thing to watch your child reap what they have sown, but I did not walk over to comfort him. I did not offer to pay his bail. I picked up my briefcase, wrapped my arm around my granddaughter's trembling shoulders, and walked out into the sunlight. It has been 6 months since that morning in the courtroom. David took a plea deal. He is currently serving 3 years in a minimum security federal facility, paying off his restitution by working in the prison laundry. Jessica didn't get her immunity. The FBI doesn't look kindly on influencers who try to pin wire fraud on their accomplices when the IP logs prove otherwise. Her assets were seized, her Instagram account was suspended permanently, and she is awaiting her own trial while living in her sister's cramped basement. The empire of beige aesthetics and therapy speak crumbled into dust. As for me, I got my money back. Once the bank confirmed the fraud, they reversed the mortgage and seized the remaining funds from the shell company. But more importantly, I got my peace. I am sitting on the back porch of my cabin. The air is warm, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. Beside me, on a small wooden table, sits a mug of hot cinnamon tea. Inside the cabin, I can hear the sounds of life. Riley is sitting at the kitchen island, typing an essay for her AP history class. She has been living with me since the trial. She got a part-time job at the local marina. She pays for her own gas. She is learning the value of $1 earned rather than $1 stolen. She is safe. I take a sip of my tea, letting the warmth settle deep into my chest. For decades, I believed that a mother's love meant being a permanent safety net. I believed that if I just gave a little more, sacrificed a little more, my son would eventually find his footing. But I was wrong. A safety net, when left out too long, becomes a hammock. It breeds entitlement, and entitlement eventually breeds contempt. True love isn't about funding someone's illusions. Sometimes true love is the courage to let them fall, so they can finally learn how to stand up on their own. I look out over the glittering water. I am 68 years old. My credit score is pristine. My home is mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I am exactly where I belong.